Thanks for tuning in to the Marvel Movie Minute.
Want to skip those pesky ads and get early access?
Become a member at truestory.fm/join and discover all the other great perks that come with it.
Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a weekly podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 5 minutes at a time. In this, our 8th season, we are looking at Thor, The Dark World. I'm Pete Wright.
I'm Matthew Fox.
And today we're talking about minutes 16 through 20, which begin with Jane telling Darcy she's not interested and ends with Darcy asking her new intern for his shoe.
Yeah, I should say, I'm the one who wrote that. First, when I say that Jane is telling Darcy that she's not interested, no, that does not mean the question that is often asked in fan fictions about these two characters.
Yes.
It's not being interested in the scientific thing that Darcy is trying to show her. But more importantly, I did want to mention that you could say this period starts with Jane Foster saying the word seabass 12 times. I should say perhaps the phrase seabass 12 times. And I decided after listening to some of the earlier Marvel Movie Minutes that we hadn't been doing deep enough dives into the research. And so I could have said she repeats the word seabass. I could have said she says it multiple times, but no, it is 12 times. And I went back and listened to it 5 different times in order to make sure that it is exactly 12 times that she speaks the words seabass.
That is outstanding. That is an attention to detail you don't get from other movie-by-minute shows that explore Thor: The Dark World.
I'm telling you, they probably would have said multiple times.
They probably would have. You know, I'm glad you brought up seabass. May I have the floor for just a moment?
You may. Talk to us about this Chilean delicacy.
We do need to talk about the sea bass. This is has become the unofficial mascot of upscale movie dining scenes. And I think it's fascinating because it started with the Patagonian toothfish. Do you know of the Patagonian toothfish, Matthew?
I think I'm about to.
You sure are. It is the toothfish, which sounds less like a buttery dinner and more like a villain from a Pixar movie about plaque. In 1977, a seafood wholesaler with a dream and a thesaurus renamed it Chilean sea bass because Americans need their fish to sound like a travel brochure. And just like that, it went from, what is that, to I'll take it medium with beurre blanc. Cut to the 1990s, the sea bass swims its buttery way into every high-end restaurant and by extension, every movie scene featuring a character too rich to order chicken. You've seen it in American Psycho. Patrick Bateman's eating it while discussing murder and business cards. You've seen it in The Devil Wears Prada. It's a culinary version of couture. If a character orders a sea bass in a movie, you know one of two things. They are either wealthy or they are about to be murdered by someone who is. And then we have the catch. It turns out we took this horribly named Patagonian toothfish and rebranded it so well that we nearly wiped it out. Environmentalists had to step in and beg people to stop ordering it like it was the fish equivalent of the iPhone. Now you can order it guilt-free as long as it comes with a side of certification and not ecological collapse. So we are figuring out sea bass. But it was a questionable choice for many, many years.
Here is my question. I went into this conversation. Look, I am learning things, and you, the audience, are learning things as well. I went into this conversation thinking that there was bass, which you can fish.
Yeah.
And then there is sea bass. There's also bass the beer, but that's a whole other thing. But there is sea bass, which is a version of bass. And then there is a particular sea bass in southern South America known as Chilean sea bass.
Yes.
Are you telling me that not only is that all sea bass are Chilean and that the phrases Chilean sea bass and sea bass are simply interchangeable?
And what I am telling you is the Chilean sea bass moniker was assigned to the Patagonian toothfish to make it more palatable. And it is not a bass per se.
Okay. But so what I'm saying is because in this movie, and I believe in the entirety of the MCU, the nation of Chile is not mentioned. But we still are assuming that the dish that Jane Foster is considering ordering and saying, as I mentioned before, 12 different times, not 11, not 13. 14 is right out for Monty Python fans. Only 12. But if she says sea bass, she means Chilean sea bass.
She means Chilean sea bass, and she also, by extension, means Patagonian toothfish.
Patagonian toothfish.
Yeah.
I mean, it's CSR or it's CSB or is it PTR? So, PTF. So
I think we need to do our part to bring Patagonian toothfish back to the fore. The fish had a name.
Except I don't like fish.
Oh, all right.
So this is the kind of deep level analysis that happens when you've got a movie with utterly no depth to it. But it turns out that this week we do have a substance that has depth in both the comic books and in the world of both mythology and science, all back to our granddaddy of science, Aristotle, and our granddaddy of Greek mythology, Homer. Both of them are going to get involved in the story of Aether, because this is the 5 minutes in which we first discover the Aether. Now, the word is not said, and yes, the Aether was already introduced earlier, but we never really got to fully dive into all good things Aether or Aether, depending on your level of pretentiousness. So in these minutes, they wind up going through a drive, they leave a fancy restaurant, they go through the streets of London, they wind up on Ironmonger Lane, and then take a right turn onto a alleyway, going right past the anthropologist, the anthropologist bar, all those things coming to us, thank you, of the MCU location scout, and they wind up in this like warehouse container yards area. The area that they're doing all this in was shot at the old vinyl factory, which is a old factory in London that I believe is still used for shots like this. Though whether it's still there or not, I did not get to find out. That can be something that listeners can let us know. But in this area, our friends have some driving adventures. Darcy claims that she's very good at driving on British roads. Whether she is, we will leave up to you in the audience for debate. That perhaps can be a bonus episode at some point. But Jane, Darcy, and the intern, who we will get to in a moment, run into a bunch of I want to say sea urchins, but that's because you have me with fish on the brain. Street urchins or
they're
street
actually
kids.
Patagonian children.
They are not Patagonian, but one or two of them might be. It is an ethnically diverse group of kids, as it should be for the streets of London. But they are playing with a weird portal thing, which is, they can drop a can and it will fall down a shaft and then appear again at the top of the shaft. Sometimes they don't. There's a big truck at the bottom of this area that they can just sort of tap and it will spin around as their gravity is being wonky. And we see earlier containers and trucks stood up on their sides. And while it's not said in these minutes, I think a discerning viewer such as myself or yourself, Pete, can figure out that this is the location of the Aether on Earth. Let's take a dive into the Aether. First of all, this is a term that comes to us originally from Greek mythology, as do so many concepts. Homer talked about it and was often used as a word to describe kind of like the upper sky, the area of that, what we could now be considered the heavens, the area that, for example, that dawn would ride off into, that the sun would ride through. And in mythology, there's both a personified version of Aether. It's a god who's sort of the god of that upper stratosphere, but it's also in the same way that nectar is I forget there's a word, but there's a word that is a nectar of the gods, which they drink. Aether is the air they breathe. It's sort of like the equivalent of the air that humans breathe, but for gods. It is this utterly pure essence. And like a lot of things from mythology, these concepts then wound up coming into us through some of the earliest scientists that we have, such as Aristotle. Plato was one of the first to write about how there were 4 elements: earth, air, wind, and fire. It's not just a great band from the 70s, but it's a concept that goes all the way back to Plato. And Aristotle had added this idea of a 5th element, a sort of undefined thing called the ether.
It's the umami of elements.
Yes, exactly. It's the thing that's sort of not quite known. In Latin, this word becomes known as quintessence, which is going to be relevant for our gaming friends, so I'll get to in just a minute. But it then goes on to become kind of important to science, but also important to a lot of pseudoscience. A lot of medieval alchemy becomes very interested in quintessence or ether. and believes that that is the sort of element through which things can be transformed and transported, all the way down to the 19th century, when a lot of the people who are kind of pushing the edges of science into pseudoscience, into mythology type thing, become very convinced of this idea of the ether. And it's you've heard the phrase, I think, that only like 2% of the known universe has actually been discovered.
Mm-hmm.
That there's all this stuff out there called dark, a lot of it's called dark matter and stuff like that. Ether is kind of a proto dark matter. It was believed to be this substance through which, when we didn't really understand how light and radio and electromagnetic waves moved, that ether was the sort of the substance through which they moved. And because of that, there was an experiment done in 1887, the Michelson-Morley experiment, in which they disproved once and for all that ether exists.
Okay.
Now, you may wonder, how do I know all this? Although a small portion of our audience, if they are the older generation and also enjoy role-playing games, they may have played the game Mage the Ascension, part of the White Wolf. If you played Vampire the Masquerade or Werewolf the Apocalypse, the magic user one was Mage the Ascendance. And of course, what was the substance that those mages used? Quintessence. And what was one of the traditions of mages? The Sons of Aether, who were kind of like the mad scientists and all that. So all this ether stuff has its roots in Greek mythology, Greek science that comes to us via British ideas of physics and stuff like that. Even Newton talked about ether as an idea, so it definitely has some like real roots, but it has all now been proven by the end of the 19th century.
Outstanding. I had no idea. I've heard of those games in title only.
They were some of the best.
Were you a
games,
wielder of ether yourself when you played?
I was. In fact, many of these books behind me are this is Mage the Sorcerer's Crusade, which is the mage game for the mid-ages. But if you see the purple books that are behind me, the green ones are the vampire ones, the reddish blackish ones are the werewolf ones. We've now thoroughly alienated 90% of my audience. But I promise you there are role-playing games other than Dungeons and Dragons that those of us in the Gen X category, or just people who are young and weird and like things in the Gen X category, have heard of. I suppose that just because I got really excited about the one thing I saw in these 5 minutes that connected to stuff I care about, that there is some other stuff in these minutes we should care about. So why don't we back up a little bit?
Okay.
We have driven through the streets of London. First of all, let's talk about the new intern we meet.
Intern Ian.
So in what I assume has to not be a coincidence, but I can't find any confirmation of this. But the character's full name is Ian Boothby. I think we learn the last name later in the movie. It's definitely in the cast, in the credits. But Ian Boothby was also a very well-known comics writer. He was the lead writer on the Simpsons comics and on the Futurama comics for Matt Groening's Bongo comics. He's married to Pia Guerra, who is the lead writer and co-creator of Why the Last Man. And together, the two of them had done a lot of comic projects together. So he's just a very small character. He's kind of Darcy's love interest in this, but he's named Ian Boothby. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
I don't think it is either. I think he's a delightful sort of a third wheel in this little bit. And it's interesting that he serves this role as being a foil for Darcy, where Darcy is a foil for Jane, right? This is trickle-down humiliation and comedy, and I think it works actually very well.
And I think it's called out later when Jane refers to him as my intern's intern.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think and I think that's a perfect way to sort of carry it.
He is played, by the way, by Jonathan Howard, who would go on to have small roles in World War Z and Godzilla King of the Monsters.
King of the Mountains.
Godzilla does become king of a mountain or two as well.
Sure
but,
does. And they'll probably use that title at some point down the road in the franchise. So we get this. We have a drive, as you already mentioned. We do get a brief excursion with Eric Selvig, and he is now naked running about Stonehenge. This is a nice bit of comic relief. We don't have a lot of Selvig yet in the movie, and so it's nice to see him played by the hero of Sweden, Stellan Skarsgård. We know him most recently from, say Dune, the Dune franchise, Chernobyl. He's everywhere. We love him. He's in, I think, 5 Marvel films. From here, he goes on to Age of Ultron and Love and Thunder. He's briefly cameoed.
I will briefly mention that at the time of watching this, I had just a few hours ago watched the latest episodes of Andor. in which he's playing a very dark, very serious revolutionary. And so going immediately from that to his naked form at Stonehenge was a bit of a mind shock.
He is outstanding in Andor, which has been just a delight so far this season. So he's an astrophysicist, a professor, and I would like to talk to you about the reluctant sage. What do you know of the reluctant sage archetype? Because I think this is where we're entering Selvig's reluctant sage period.
I mean, generally my reluctance to put sage into my dishes is more that it's hard to find. I tend to like it, though. It has a slight bit of a, like, I don't get the soapy taste from cilantro, but I sometimes get it from sage, but I wouldn't say I'm reluctant to use it.
Okay, well, let me tell you how Selvig plays into this. Of course, we know Joseph Campbell. We know the Hero with 1,000 Faces and the archetypes that we get. And in Campbell's work, the archetype we're talking about is the classic mentor character in these stories. But yeah, and these are like, who are these? These are like your Gandalfs. These are your Merlins. These are Obi-Wan, of course. The reluctant sage comes as storytelling has matured and modernized, right? Audiences are savvier. Writers are subverting the tidy dynamic of the mentor character. And that's where we get the reluctant sage. This usually is cataloged as the brilliant or once brilliant mind or some mystical figure resists the call to mentor, because they have either been broken by the world or they're disillusioned by past failures or they're battling their internal demons for whatever reason. They have the capacity to mentor, but not the capability or desire to do so. So they know the stakes. They know that they have vital insight and they're emotionally or psychologically unfit to be the mentor they should be. And Eric Selvig, I think, is one of those guys. He's a literal genius, and he is yet so traumatized by alien mind control that even though he knows the science better than anyone, he is not capable of being the role of the mentor that everybody else in his universe needs, right? So Selvig is obviously one of them. I think, you could characterize Emmett Brown, Doc Brown from as Back to the Future. The later Rick Deckard, Harrison Ford's portrayal of Deckard in Blade Runner 2049 is that kind of character. We even get, and I'm bringing it back to your world, Luke Skywalker, circa the reluctant Jedi, or the Last Jedi, right, is the reluctant Jedi at that point, right? He entirely rejects his role due to his own perceived failure, even though he's literally one of the last people who's most equipped to deal with this stuff.
Well, and he learned it well, because while Obi-Wan was kind of eager and saying like, hey, you got to come along with me, Yoda was the reluctant sage and had to be talked into it. Also interesting to apply that to Selvig. I hadn't thought about it before, but it's very fitting because this is now the second time Selvig has kind of done this. Because if you remember at first, Jane was really kind of tapping into these things, and Selvig was more trying to like protect her academic career, thinking like we really shouldn't go off chasing this nonsense, until she really had to convince him like, no, look, this is truly real.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think this kind of archetype today and in this story is more sort of realistic to the tones the audience is expecting, right? Because I think we as audience members are skeptical of perfect mentors. And so, show us somebody with some scars, and I think we relate better. We understand trauma as a formative part of our own backstory, right? We get it. We live it. So let's show us how messy humanity is. I think Selvig, this is a comic moment that actually discusses something very serious for poor Selvig, which is his brain is mush right now, and he needs to go into recovery mode. So there we go. It's a very brief moment for Selvig, but it is funny, and he's naked at Stonehenge.
It's nonsense, but often like in a character like that, where this is now more the drunken master or the kind of like the
great pick, yeah,
the sage who is kind of like like 10 words of madness but 1 word of total wisdom amongst them, and even the madness makes some sense. He's not just at a local mall. He's not just at a random area. He's at Stonehenge.
Mhm.
Stonehenge, of course, which is found in Salisbury, England, dating back to originally 4,000 or so from the BCE, I believe completed around 2400 to 2200. Yes, we really did our research this week. But more importantly, Stonehenge isn't just a cool collection of rocks. It is first of all, it functions basically as an ancient sundial. It is completely lined up in a way that on the summer solstice, like the rocks are lined in a very specific way that clearly shows a great deal of understanding of the movement of the planets and the stars and all that of the Neolithic people who constructed it. But more importantly, it would have been a space of, it was considered to be kind of therefore a place of connection to the world of the gods, and a place that was considered very holy by the Druids, by the religion, the pagan religions of the Neolithic peoples who lived in that area at the time it was made. Neolithic peoples, by the way, who were deeply influenced by who? The Vikings, by whom they were constantly getting invaded.
Sure.
And so, the gods to which the Stonehenge was theoretically a portal is not necessarily the same gods as Odin and Thor and the like, but I think it's close enough that, if you told the Selvig, hey, there's going to be some portal space somewhere in the United Kingdom that is going to be a place where you would go and do your measurements because it might be the next time that these gods appear, Stonehenge is actually a perfectly reasonable choice for that.
Totally. And even more reasonable for Eric's sort of kit-bashed kind of retro science equipment. I actually love, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the toaster-looking thing that Darcy asks Ian to get. I actually love that Selvig is holding that giant rod, looks like a beachcombing metal detector, and that is, as the verified genius academic, he's using these things that look like they're held together with duct tape versus the Shield Stark technology, which is all, clear panes of glass and completely mutable interfaces. And I think that the breadth of the technology we get to see here, him running around naked with this rod, is a nice nod to the breadth of the technology that they display in the movie.
For sure. Why exactly he's naked? Well, many worships of that kind were done naked. Skyclad is often referred to. Whether it's because of that or because he's just escaped from some sort of mental institution at which he was not given a full collection of clothes, we again lead up to the reader, to the listener, to the watcher.
They arrive at the yard. And speaking of Stonehenge, did you happen to notice the name of the shipping lines that were docked there, that were in stowage there in the lines around them?
Was it henge shipping?
It was not. It was Runico lines. Runico lines. I looked and looked and looked for some reference to Runico lines in the comic and in the rest of the MCU, because sometimes you see these things show up. Is Runico something that I've just missed and it's actually like, the level of Roxxon? And I could find nothing that indicates that level of sort of fame.
Similar bit of deep dive into mythology. As they are entering the area on Earth, Darcy and Jane and Ian, not Andrew, Ian, as we are reminded, Darcy's not very good with names. Two birds all of a sudden sort of fly across our screen, and half the time they fly across the screen, it's behind a pane of glass. We don't really see them well. They certainly seem fairly dark. And Odin, we know, is very associated with two ravens. Did you get a feeling that those were ravens? I did some searching on the birds in Thor: The Dark World, and mostly was reminded that no, Alfred Hitchcock had nothing to do with the making of Thor: The Dark World, as you can tell by the quality of the movie. But I don't know if those are supposed to be ravens, if it's supposed to just be random birds. But I like the idea of the ravens, that Odin's kind of keeping an eye on all this.
That is the extent to which I have to give that theory credibility, that I also like it. So now we're here and we get to explore, I think, what we've been waiting for, the Aether with Jane and Darcy. And, you asked, what do we know of the Aether in the comics? And we talked about this a little bit in some of our earlier episodes. In the comics, quick review, the Aether was not the Aether. The Aether is literally a Thor: The Dark World convention where we see it as this fluid-like substance that eventually we'll talk about it having its way with Jane. In the comics, it's the reality gem.
Right.
We're talking about. And of course, later in the MCU, it becomes the reality stone. It is traditionally yellow in the comics, not red. It's usually used or in the hands of our, typical usual suspects, heavy hitters, Thanos, Collector, Adam Warlock. And it does alter reality itself on a universal scale. So you can do things like say, gosh, I want all frogs to be lawyers. And suddenly all frogs are lawyers in the courtroom, or all lawyers are frogs. So this is an absurdly powerful conceit. And
right.
That leads us to the inspired by the reality gem version, the Aether, in the comics. And this is the first time we get to see it doing something that we've never seen it do before. And I don't think we've seen it do since.
Yeah, this whole kind of like flipping things around. Now, granted, by the time that we get to them, the reality stone in the Infinity Gauntlet, like anything goes, quite literally. But yeah, this whole like reality is kind of topsy-turvy, twisty-turny, is completely a fabrication, but creation of this scene in this moment.
Jane and Darcy and intern Ian, they're measuring stuff. To measure stuff, they have a phase meter. The phase meter is not a thing. It's not a real thing. There's no phase meter.
You're kidding.
It is a fictional device. It obviously, it's playing with or let's say riffing off of the phase shifts we get in physics or electronics. And it is presumably designed to measure waveforms and signal alignment between the universes, right? The realms here. But this is an incredible, the MCU does an incredible thing, right? The sleight of hand that they have working scientific vernacular into nonsense language and doing it in a way that actually feels fairly believable. Like, for example, convergence. We've already talked about the convergence where the 9 realms aligned, but this is inspired by real astrophysics, right? Convergence element. And so I think these things are funny. And I've actually started a list, and I want to make sure we document the science terms used by Eric Selvig in the MCU, because you put it in the mouth of Skarsgård and I believe it, because Swedish hero.
You could put him on Star Trek and have him talk about, flux capacitors and all these sorts. That's a Back to the Future thing. But that
was good. No, you could believe it because he'd be the one saying it, whether it's Star Trek, Back to the Future tie-in.
Now, I will say, I made a certain sound because my ability to believe this is stretched a bit, because one of the first things Jane says is that these readings, and I think actually Darcy points it out, and then Jane acknowledges it, and then Darcy, as she does, Darcy would love the world of reality television. Like I've said before, I think Darcy and Madison, spelled with an I, but not where you expect it, definitely needs to get together and watch some good reality TV together. Because Darcy loves the soap opera. Darcy loves to just kind of needle Jane about the soap opera in her life. Although isn't interested in Jane dating, which seems weird to me, but putting that aside. But either way, Darcy kind of points out and then kind of smirks a bit as Jane recognizes that the readings they get are the same they're getting from New Mexico. Which is interesting to me.
Why is that?
Because the Aether Stone was not in New Mexico. Nor were trucks flipping up and down in New Mexico. So I have no idea what this measures, but apparently it is so broad that it both encompasses like anything relating to Asgard, but the Aether is not of Asgard. It's of something different. I'm calling BS on this.
That's delightful. Calling BS on this movie. That's like the lowest of the low-hanging fruit you could pick off that tree.
You know what I'm going to say? You know what I'm going to say? Because I think here's the thing, is that it's not just calling BS. It's that it feels like they're trying to do something. And they're trying to put a name on something that doesn't really deserve that name. I'm going to call these moments from now on the Patagonian Toothfish. This is a Patagonian Toothfish because it's not real.
Something
it's
for
not,
the glossary. Excellent.
There we go. Okay. That's the new phrase, of the catchphrase of this. We're going to be in 7 years from now. We're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and calling things the Patagonian Toothfish of that movie, and people have no idea what they're talking about.
We need to get ready because I'm making a shirt.
Okay.
To celebrate the Patagonian Toothfish. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't, this whole thing, but I see why it bothers you. I will fight and die for your right to not believe it. The issue is, do we think that there's an energetic glow from all things interstellar? Because as you so rightly said, we're not talking about a specifically Asgardian thing here, right? We're talking about a universal construct, the Aether, and not something that is only available or connected to Asgard. That's the part that starts to fray this experience. But the law of narrative economy says that at some point, our earthbound Midgardian scientists need to have a hook that will connect them to Asgard. And that's the emotional tie-in right now. And Jane needs to have her hope somehow rationalized by the display on the Midgardian tricorder that they're working with there.
I mean, as a lover of all things tricorder, I'm not saying that it is like surpasses tricorder level of silliness.
Yeah,
it's not that I paused this movie and had to turn to my spouse the time we watched it together and said, gosh, the believability of this movie had me so hooked in. But you know what? That moment totally pulled me out. I was going to let it go. I had no need to comment on it. But when you then said, that these devices give us an air of believability, that's when I had to say, no, Mr. Pete Wright, you are trying to label something a Chilean sea bass. That is a toothfish. So
I get it. I don't think I knew all along that this was a shiv to me personally. I get it now. I get it now.
Actually, that's what the shirt should say. I'm sorry, Pete, but that is a toothfish.
That is a toothfish. Okay. Well, I'm not going to stand down necessarily from that because I am also a romantic and I like the idea that Jane gets a little blush on because of the idea. The thing that I have, frankly, greater trouble with is that they could look at the display on this tricorder type device and see the circles and waves coming out of the graph and actually remember the familiarity of those readings. I don't think that interface is one that cements readings in your mind from however long ago New Mexico was from right now.
I mean,
many movies.
I am going to draw our attention back to the aforementioned tricorders, which on a screen smaller than like a 2012 smartphone, were able to tell you encyclopedia length ideas within seconds. So that's a level I'm willing to allow. All
right. That's fair. Now they start throwing stuff. And this is the thing that we haven't seen before or since, right? I don't think until we get Doctor Strange do we see these types of portals, allowing things to go back and forth.
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. How does this sequence hit you where we have the street rats, the children, urchins.
We're in Dickensian kind of linguistics.
I know.
Here,
I went to Aladdin there. I'm sorry.
There you go.
So our urchins. How do you feel about them throwing their trash through the ether?
I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. Like, what else is a person possibly going to do in the middle of downtown London, one of the most exciting cities in the whole known world?
Not for urchins, though. It's not exciting for urchins.
I grew up poor in New York City, okay? There's so much easy way to do free stuff. You go to a tourist area and give people bad directions. Like, there's so many fun things you can do.
That's maniacal. Just diabolical right there.
It was fun. It was fine. I'm sure they found their way home eventually. I was a terrible kid. But
they're still there.
The point being, I don't mind it. It seems I started out with the ether because that was something I was excited about. And I feel like you're dragging me back to the parts where I've got to remind ourselves this is not a good movie. But this just sort of feels like, filmmaking 101, where they have to do a project on building suspense, and the student is like, look, I have the things on their sides. What could that be? And then I have these other things that look out of place. What could that be? And then the student uses 2 fingers to like flip a truck around and it spins. Could that be reality having different rules? Could it be Aetherific? And then you have something get dropped and it comes down again.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it doesn't work. Who knows? Yeah, it just felt sophomoric. It felt like, okay, I get it. There's something weird here. You told us that 10 seconds ago. You did not need these 3 minutes to continue showing it again and again and again and again.
Well, once again, you'll be surprised to know I like it. But let me tell you, I think they didn't make good on the cut that they made between Stonehenge and the warehouse district, because the containers are on their sides as if they're starting to build a Stonehenge, right? Like they're kind of circular, and we never get an establishing shot to see what is the entire scope of what these things are doing. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I think it would have actually been cool if Selvig's running around Stonehenge and then we cut to our intrepid heroes and they end up in container Stonehenge. Container henge.
I mean, that could have been the origins of Carhenge, which exists in, I believe, New Mexico.
Right. Carhenge, legit thing.
Yeah, I'll admit, I did not catch that connection at all. So
see, that's what I mean.
Yeah, it was apparently very, very subtle.
I do think the kids throwing things, through the portal, the one that gets me is if you've ever played the game Portal, one of the things about the physics of the game is, boy, if you're not careful, you can really hurt yourself, because that I don't know that the kid should have been able to safely catch the glass bottle. That thing should have been moving maybe a little bit faster than it was.
I was curious about that. It did seem that they kind of like let it out fairly far into the middle, and then it was quite close to the edge. I did wonder why one of these kids hasn't tried it themselves. But of course,
because sometimes you don't come back.
Yeah, I mean,
well, kids are dumb. Maybe they would have tried it.
Also true. All right.
But
I think then we do get to another little moment of humor there, where because Darcy very much has the like, oh, I want to try. Because Jane tries it with some like little smashed up can and is kind of fascinated. And of course, Darcy wants to try it, but she doesn't want to try it with her own stuff, which I think is becoming a running sort of gag for Darcy of her wanting to have fun, but the extent to which it is at other people's expense is kind of lost to her. And so she wants to first grab one of Jane's shoes, and then we end the 5 minutes with one of Ian's shoes. And so, of course, this is one of the great mysteries now that we're going to spend the next week wondering, does Ian give her his shoe? And we don't know. Because we learn, we kind of brushed past this, and this is maybe a mistake of ours, that Ian is dedicated to all things scientific. He's not I think he probably thinks Darcy's cute, but he is a Jane Foster devotee, and that is how he has gotten signed up to all this.
For sure. You're right. That's an important thing. I'm glad you brought it up. He's an absolute fan of working with Jane. She sees him as an intern's intern. That is unrequited respect.
Yes.
All right. I think that's it. She walks off. We get a little bit of her walking off, but we don't see her interacting with anything Aetherific. Aetherific is going to be the word of
that
the
will be
day.
For next week.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I will just say, by the way, for anybody who is kind of interested in old-fashioned typefaces and stuff like that, you'll sometimes see, especially in books of Latin and things like that, that there's the letter A and the letter E, but then there's sometimes but what looks like a letter because it's one unit of typography of the A and the E stuck together. And that traditionally, that is how Aether is spelled. That's often when it's pronounced Aether instead of ether. And of course, the more modern word of ether is a derivation of Aether. The character AE is a digraph, a combination of 2 letters used to represent a single sound. It's often pronounced as a long E or a short A sound, depending on the word. It's also known as the Ash character and has historical roots in Old English and Scandinavian languages, which fitting for where we are.
Also called a ligature. I can also say that. It can also be typographically, It can be called a ligature. Good. I'm glad we've covered all the bases here.
All right, friends, go forth and find the digraphs in your life. Tell us about them, and we will read your emails about 5 months after we'll record next week's episode.
Thank you so much, everybody. Make sure to go check out all of Matthew's shows, the Ethical Panda shows on True Story FM. They're fantastic. And, again, in 5 months when you hear this, go back and listen to Matthew talk about Andor and also watch Andor. By then, you'll be able to binge the whole thing.
I'm having a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun talking about something that is just, completely it's good escapism. There's no relation to real life. There's nothing
no
hard
relation
in it.
to real life. No, absolutely.
There was a time some time ago when the mayor of Reykjavik, I think it was, insisted that anyone who worked in the Icelandic government had to have watched all 5 seasons of The Wire. That's going to be my question for anyone running and sort of anti-Trump is just, have you seen all of Andor? Did you understand it?
Did you understand it? Oh,
and then
smart.
I will give them a vote. So
Smart reference.
with that, thank you so much. Live long and prosper.